Welcome to the Storypowers Podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, keynote speaker and storytelling coach, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is Ryan Avery. Ryan is one of the nicest people you could ever meet, but he's been making me feel guilty for a decade. In 2012, I joined Toastmasters, and after I delivered a handful of speeches that got raving feedback, I honestly thought I was a rising star in the public speaking world. And then Ryan, at age 25, became the youngest world champion of public speaking in history, only 8 months after he joined. Thanks for that, Ryan. Since that day, Ryan has delivered more than 500 keynotes in 33 countries around the globe on his mission to show leaders how to go from A to Z in the industry. Ladies and gentlemen, Ryan Avery.
Hello.
Ryan, welcome to the show.
I did not know you joined in 2012. That's awesome. That's amazing. Can you believe that was 9 years ago? That's insane to me.
Yes, I can believe, and I remember you were probably, I think, you obviously were the world champion in the year I joined. Yeah. So I think I had in my mind, I watched your speech again the other day, and I remember that speech. I still remember from that time. So yeah, I felt that we're connected somehow. Right? Something else that I noticed is when I went to your website, my first impression was, wow, this guy, the balls on this guy, because your website says Ryan Avery, the keynote speaker. Yeah. And I was like, that's a bit bold. And then I got why, but that has there's a direct connection between that and sort of your origin story of how you became a speaker, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. So it's this whole concept of why would you want to be A when you can be the? Why would you want to be a dad when you could be the dad? Why would you want to be a speaker when you can be the speaker? And when you say you're the, that doesn't mean that you can't grow or that you're not that there's still room for you to improve. I mean, I'm on this journey of wanting to be the, because that's whenever I committed to that, that's when everything came my way. When I was saying, I'm going to commit to working towards being the in what it is that I do.
So your story is completely bonkers because many people take dares or dare themselves to do stuff. Yeah. But from what I understand, you decided, I'm not the best in the world at anything. And then you decided, okay, I'm going to be the best in the world at public speaking of all things. Yeah. And I know that I heard you say that while you were doing that, you were practicing for something like 2 hours a day or 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening. Yeah. And the first thing I wanted to know is, what were you actually practicing for that long? So because obviously there's the content part, but what were you spending all that time practicing?
Yeah, it was definitely more than 4 hours. So it would be like 2 hours in the morning, and it'd probably be anywhere between like 2 to 5 hours after work, because I was working full time as well when I was competing. So it was studying, it was learning, it was watching the past 25 years of winners, first, second, and third over again, dissecting what differentiated first versus second and third. It was going to meetings. It was figuring out from my coaches and my mentors. Like, I remember I was at 753 words for my speech, and one of my mentors said, you got to get it down to 750. And I was like, there's no way I can cut 3 words out of this. Like, I cannot cut 3 words. And he said, well, then we're not meeting until you get those words out. And it took me hours to figure out what 3 words to rearrange or do. Like 3 words, hours, right? So it's practicing body language. I'm very tone deaf in a lot of regards. So it takes me a long time to learn tone of how to go up and how to go down. And with that being, body language and vocal variety being part of one of the things that you're judged on, I had to really spend extra time on that. So yeah, it was constant training. I had never given a speech before, so a professional speech. So yeah.
And for anyone who doesn't know, which I doubt is the case given this podcast, but Toastmasters is the world's largest and oldest public speaking organization, and speeches from Toastmasters are different than speeches from plenty of other places. And if anyone hasn't watched it, they're in for a rude awakening, because I think you described a Toastmaster competition as, you compared it to a gymnastics competition.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a very, like you said, there's a very big difference than my competitive speeches than my corporate speeches, right? And in fact, after I won the world championship, I didn't plan to be a speaker. This isn't what I was trying to do. I woke up the next day to 264 emails asking me to speak. And I was like, okay. And then it actually hurt me because once I started getting in the corporate world, people saw my competitive speech and they were like, oh, no, we do not want that type of speaker because it's very theatrical. And so the reason why I say it's like gymnastics is, well, you're judged. You have 14 judges at that level. You're judged on a variety of different things and you're scored. And so you're at a level where you're working around some of 100, let's say 100 of the best speakers in the world. It gets down to little things. And so vocal variety, grammar, body language, messaging, all of these things that you're judged, quote unquote, on. And these 14 judges, like in gymnastics, are looking at those things. So I played to the judging. I played to the scorecard per se.
Yeah, I find it strange how those speeches are judged on. I don't remember if it's exactly equal criteria. It's been a while since I looked at that judging sheet, but there's a lot of weight for stuff that I think in the real world most people would agree is either not that important or not important at all. So the Toastmasters puts a lot of focus on things like body language and stage movement. And I think in most speaking, definitely in corporate speaking, as you said before, none of that stuff is important. It actually is detrimental.
Yeah.
So I wonder why it has become that with Toastmasters, where instead of giving the content a higher weight. I don't know if it's just because the content could be a very subjective analysis, whereas the other stuff can be more objective.
Yeah,
not so sure.
It's almost, it's evolved over time. Like we can see this with TED Talks, right? Like they're not moving around the stage and they're not doing vocal variety. So what I believe, and I can't speak for Toastmasters, but what I see in my personal opinion is what they were trying to ultimately get at is body language is important. Vocal variety is important. We don't want it to be distracting. Like filler words are okay until it becomes distracting. Body language, like we don't want to be just pacing back and forth. Like we want to have structure. Yeah. We want to have poise. We want to have all these things when we speak. What it's done though, the competition is it's become so grandiose that it's like the next and the next and the next. And after you've had a competition for literally almost 100 years, I think it's 100 years next year, then you're going to have that next and next and next and next thing, right? It's like an ice skating. Ice skating competitions 45 years ago are very different now, like with the tricks and spins and things that they're doing. It's very different. It's competitive.
Yeah, I would compare it less to ice skating or to gymnastics and more to like horse dressage. And you're having the horses do all these tricks that no horse would ever have any reason to do in real life.
Okay.
So one thing I wanted to ask you, because obviously you mastered all of those things. So all of those things that for the competition were important. But I would probably guess that the people that got all the way up there and that made it to the final would have gotten pretty good at most of those things as well. Now, I have a feeling for this, but do you know what was that tipped you over the edge into winning?
It was speaking from the heart. So my mentor, Randy Harvey, when he coached me and agreed to coach me, he said, I will coach you as long as you never give a speech again, if you only give a message from your heart. And I was like, what does that mean? I can't promise something. Like, I don't even know what that means. He coached me through it and he talked me through it. And when you look at the difference between first and second and third, you clearly know that they're giving a message that they believe in, that they love, that is part of who they are. And it took me a long time because at that time I was 25. And so it didn't feel like I had this message from the heart. I didn't feel like I had that. But speakers, we're not really there to teach. We're there to remind. We're there to guide. Like nothing that I'm saying is new. What it really is overlooked.
Yeah.
Right? It's overlooked. And so I'm here to remind people of something that is in my heart. And I spoke from the heart. And that's what I did. I really gave the message that I wanted to give no matter what happened with the judges.
I would also add that you spoke from the heart and you did it in the form of stories within stories within stories. And I watch a ton of Toastmaster speeches, And I'm still a member. I don't go anywhere near as often. And one of the things that I tend to lack now that I've gotten so much into the speaking and particularly the storytelling world is stories. I find that most people still underuse them. And yours, there's almost nothing that is not a story. It's a story that leads into a story that leads into a story. There's almost no exposition outside of the stories. And I don't think that's actually the norm. There's a lot of people talking about things in those types of speeches, whereas yours was, as I said, it was story and stories. I think it was 3 stories in total, but they're all sort of connected.
Well, let's think about all the things we've ever learned, right? Whether you're religious or not religious, whether you're political or not political, everything we've ever learned has been through story. Every lesson, every value, everything has been a story from, you have kids, right? Peter Pan to the Disney, Frozen, Frozen, the movie, is not like, and here's the point of Frozen, right? They share a story. You learn from that. Why would we want that to be any different when we're in the corporate world or when we're in the world of going out and inspiring and motivating? We don't. So there's this weird conflict.
Frozen's plot is such a hodgepodge of stuff because they had to cut it and fix it so many times that I'm not sure it has a point.
No,
but I get your point.
Right? It's like love, and it's for me like Frozen because I watch it all the time with my kids. To me, that was such a great story of reminding love can look very differently because we thought love was true love's kiss, but love was really the love of her sister. And so re-looking and revisiting what love really is, and that love is all around us, and love doesn't have to be a prince. It can be simply, I love my sister. I love my sibling. It was a really great message to me.
Right, let me ask you one more question on the whole Toastmasters thing, and then we move on to what I think are significantly more interesting things. You said that when you won the competition and you woke up the next day to 269 emails wanting you to speak or present somewhere. Now, this is something I find confusing because by your own admission, and I think anyone's, when you look at one of those speeches, unless you're very much in the Toastmaster world, that's not a speech that you want to take somewhere. Yeah. You don't watch that and go, okay, I want you in my company doing something like that. It's almost the opposite. I definitely don't do that in my company. Yeah. So were these people just assuming that because you're that good at speaking that you could do it straight? Or how did that work?
It was a mix of a lot of people. It was people who were Toastmasters, who were in the corporate world, who wanted to bring in the world champion. It was people who wanted to know my journey. They had heard that I had won a world championship at 8 months. And so they wanted to know how I did that. It was a variety of different types of people. Most people had a connection to Toastmasters in some way though, right? They were in Toastmasters 10 years ago, or they are currently in Toastmasters. And then it freaked me out because I spent months doing something for 7 minutes. They're like, hey, can you give an hour keynote? And I was like, how am I going to talk for an hour? It was this wild concept to me. And it was a lot of anxiety at the beginning because I heard this. I actually read this yesterday. I had Brian Miller on the podcast last week, and he quoted that famous Mark Twain quote, which is, "I'm sorry, I didn't have time to write a shorter letter." Yeah. And there's one about a speech which is, if you want me to speak for an hour, I'm ready now. But if you want me to speak for 10 minutes, I'm going to need a week. Yeah. It's so true. Today I gave a 15-minute keynote this morning before this podcast, and it took me hours to get ready for that. It took me hours.
See, this is something I'm just finding out, and I'm finding one of those miraculous things about stories and storytelling that I didn't know before. Because I used to compete all the time on Toastmasters, and I think I got us back there, unfortunately, but I think you appreciate this one. The reason, because I did, like many people that compete, I was keen to go as far as I could go, and the reason I couldn't go was because of my daughter. And what happened was I was into it was the humorous one, so I won the club, I won the area, and then I competed a division, and I won division, and I think it was a pretty strong speech, and I had prepared the hell out of it, and I had been practicing for a few weeks, but my wife was pregnant with her first kid, and she was due in early December, and the competition was in early November, And then 2 days before I had to fly out to the competition, my wife started getting contractions, and that was it.
Yeah,
and I actually spoke to
the right
I spoke to the doctor, and I said, okay, so can this wait until Sunday? Because by Sunday I'll be fine. And she's like, I'm not sure if you can go past Friday. I was like, Friday is the same. He's like, can I do the semis and then come back on Saturday? Because I might not win.
Can we postpone birth?
I mean, that would be commitment to the cause. So what I was going to say is I used to compete. I used to compete a lot. And there was this one particular competition where I had been practicing a speech for quite a while, and I tweaked the text and I rewrote it, I changed words, I rehearsed it, I did all that stuff, right, that people do. And then I think a night or 2 nights before the competition, I got an email from the organizers, and it said, for this competition, speeches can be no longer than 5 minutes. And I thought, I'm screwed, because there is no way I can take 2.5 minutes out of the speech. And I was going to quit and quit the competition. But then I thought, it's just that I have that story about my wife and the picnic in Tuscany when she lost her keys. I could just tell that. And I thought of an introduction, and I thought of a moral of the story to close, rehearsed it 4 or 5 times, did it the next day, never had so much fun on stage, won the competition. And ever since, I realized that, like, if you do a lot of stories, the stories are, it's kind of just plug and play on Keynotes. I've got one coming up in a week, and it's going to be 25 minutes. And took me 5 minutes to put it together, and I rehearsed it twice, and it's 90% there.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's stories that I've told before. And I can just tell them again.
Yeah, I call it the Lego theory for me. So it's like having 100. I have like 150 Legos. A client comes to me and says, we want 10 Legos, and so I put 10 Legos together. I know how to piece it together and then present it.
Sure. Yeah. Right. So okay. So I want to get into the stuff that you do, and one of the things I wanted to cover as well is, I don't know if you even think of it that way, but you have a very clear origin story or a signature story, which is how you got into the whole speaking thing, and you use it all the time. How much of that was actually deliberate, and how much was just, this is what happened, and you're just telling that so you can get some context to people who the hell you are?
When you say I'm using it all the time, do you mean like when people ask me, or what's the...
Well, I've seen you use it. I've seen you use it on podcasts. Yes. It's on your website. Yeah. I don't think I've ever seen anything from you where the story of how you, not only the story that you won the competition, because that's just a fact of it, but the reason of why you got into the competition in the first place. That being the clear justification, the clear link between the A to Z idea.
Yeah. Well, it's this really, it's concept, it's belief that I believe everybody has something they want to accomplish. Everybody. And so I work to share that story to remind people that if there is something you want to do, you have to take action on it. And you can really go from, nothing to notable, but you have to take the action in order to do it. And that's really the concept of A to D. It's not a wish. It's not a want. It's not even willing. You have to be working to do it. And that is why I share that story is I worked to do that. It didn't magically happen. I didn't will it to happen. I worked for it to happen. And that's I know a lot of people who want to write a book. I know a lot of people who are willing to write a book. I know very few people who are working on their book. Yeah, very different.
Yes. Yeah. Having written a book, I am very well aware of why a lot of people are not actually working on their book. Although, if I'm completely honest, I actually found the process to be fairly pleasant. Yeah. Once I had gotten past the first pages and thinking, why do I write so badly? And then kind of figuring out, okay, no, actually I know how to do this. Just stop trying to pretend that I sound like someone else. Yeah. I didn't mind, but I know a lot of people that have been sitting on that project for years and years and years. Okay, so a lot of the work you do is based on this idea of stop being a leader and becoming the leader. And what I've seen you describe is that that's founded on that's based on three major pillars, and I believe those to be confidence, connection, and clarity. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Right. So obviously, what I want to talk about mostly is where stories connect and storytelling connects with those things.
Right.
So I have seen you talk about specific strategic storytelling strategies. That doesn't make any sense. Specific strategic storytelling techniques that people use for that. So can you just talk a little about that point?
Talk about being strategic.
Yeah. So when you're trying to teach people strategic storytelling,
Yes.
what types of things you're having them do or try to go from A to Z?
Yeah, so I'm a very strategy person. I can see the strategy and then know how to act on it. And so when I look at the best storytellers, when I dissect the best storytellers, what I found is one of the best strategies to implement is what I call the 3 F's of storytelling. And the 3 F's of storytelling are around fears, family, failures. Fears, family, or failures. So one of the strategies I recommend is sharing stories around fear, family, or failures, because no matter who you are, whether you're white, black, gay or straight, Christian or Muslim, from Europe or from the US, every single person has these 3 things in common. And so when we share stories around fears, family, or failures, what we do is we instantly build relatability. But here is the thing that differentiates A speaker versus the speaker. A speaker knows to share these stories. The speaker knows how to add the value attached to it. And so what I recommend is never, as the leader, we should be sharing stories that do not add value. All of our stories should add value with it. What is value? Value is something they can use. It doesn't mean they will use it. What it means now, though, is when you add value, you remain valuable to them. So that's why.
Okay, so let's get a little more specific on that, because I know where you're coming from, but I'm not sure everybody listening will understand the distinction. So when a story, not necessarily an example of a story, but if a story has value, if you're telling that story within a company, how would you define a story that has value and one that doesn't? Because I don't think that distinction will be obvious to everybody.
So I always ask myself, why am I telling this story? Okay, so do I want them to know something? Do I want them to feel something? Or do I want them to do something? I call it a KFD. So I want them to know something, I want them to feel something, I want them to do something. And then the value is attached to that KFD. And so something that might not add value is a story that, like, it's something that happened to you and you're like, oh, isn't that funny? Or like, don't you get it? Like something where it ends and you're like, cool story. It's like, you know what it's like? Those people who like to show you their photo albums and they're like, come look at this great vacation I went on. And you're like, cool, what? This is so ridiculous. But then it's like when grandpa or grandma shows you the photo album and they're like, oh, this photo here, I remember when X, Y, and Z, and they give you something within the photo. They tell you something, they teach you something, they remind you of something. And it's this concept of like sitting down with your grandparents, looking through old photos, because there's learning, there's lessons attached to it. It's not just some experience that you had.
Yes, you were describing my father-in-law in the beginning there. But yeah, I think that distinction is very clear. One is you are just telling people something that happened with you, not necessarily a problem, not a challenge, not a lesson, not a mistake, just something that happened. Oh, we went to that restaurant, it was nice, the food was this, the food was that, which is, can be interesting to know anyway, particularly if they're friends or family, although not usually that interesting. Yeah. But if there is a learning or a lesson attached, or a learning or some mistake or some challenge attached to that, then it's teaching us something about how to live, which essentially
or reminding
stories
us, feeling or doing, right?
to be.
That's why it's a KFD. It's sometimes I want people to know things, sometimes I want people to feel things, and then sometimes I want people to do things. And so understanding what's the point of my story, what's the value that's added to it, is an important aspect of what I do.
I have a friend, John Zimmer, who is also pretty big on the Toastmaster world. And I think he calls them, it's slightly different to yours, he has the 4 Fs. So he says it's fears, frustrations, failures, and fiascos. He uses a less polite word for fiascos.
Okay, cool. Yeah, great.
Yeah, but those little rules are amazing. I had Mark Brown on the show, and Mark he has what he calls first, last, worst, and best.
Oh, great, good. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, so there's lots of them. Yeah, and sometimes in the other one he talks about as well, which is something that is so obvious and people completely forget about it, which is pick up your phone and look at your pictures.
Exactly.
If your pictures don't jog your memory about something interesting that happened in your life, then either you're taking the wrong pictures or you might be living the wrong life.
Yeah, so one of the things that I do is I make sure that I develop one story a month. So at the beginning of the month, I always pick a story that I'll work to develop. And then that way, at the end of the year, I have 12 great stories. But also what this does is this keeps me refreshing. I never want to be that speaker who someone's heard me before and then they come back and they're like, oh, I've already heard him speak, right? So what this does is every year I have new content. Every year I have something fresh. And every year it's something new that people go, oh yeah, I like that, because I want that refreshing feel to be attached to me and my brand and who I am. I never want people to think, heard it before.
All right. So what is the process for that? So are you collecting ideas for stories as they happen and then picking from those? And how do you pick the story? How does that work?
So I have this thing that I call my story bank. I keep it on my phone. It's like you can use any note. I use Evernote, but you can use really any note-taking app. And so anytime I remember a fear, family, or failure story, I add the line into my phone. And then anytime I experience a fear, family, or failure story, I add it into my phone. And then every month, there's no process other than scrolling through and being like, this one, I'm going to develop this one. There are some times, though, that I develop value first. I'll come up with a scream strategy, or I'll come up with a really great piece of value, and I'll want to attach that value to a story. So then I go, okay, what's the story that aligns with this value? And then I work to develop it there. As long as you pick one story a month, you're golden, right? You're good, because you're going to develop it anyway. Am I good at the beginning of the month? No, I'm developing it, right? But at the end of the month, I practice it in front of my kids and my wife and my friends, and I put it in front of a few of my keynotes a couple weeks later, and then all of a sudden now I've got it down.
How long are the stories that you use on the keynotes usually go for?
They can really vary. I can shrink them and expand them. I have stories that are 60 seconds, and I have stories that are 15 minutes. And I can make any one of those expandable depending on how I'm looking to make the KFD.
Yeah, I think you described the two of the most basic approaches to developing stories that I don't think people necessarily, without training, can do either of those things terribly well. Because the first one is you have the story, just figure out what it means, and then craft it so it's just you cut all the fat and just left what's really important there. And I think that one, I know a lot of people that are very good with that approach. The other approach, whereas you have this specific lesson or this specific piece of value or a specific feeling you're trying to convey, finding a story that matches that, I think for most people that is a lot harder, because the way I think of it is our brain doesn't have those files, right? You don't have a file in your brain that says stories about confused communication.
Right.
So you're looking for it, and it's like, when was I confused last time? So I think it's a hard. I've spoken to. I do this. I put this out every week, and I speak to a ton of people that do this. They work in stories, and most of them do exactly the same thing you do and I do, which is you write down the ideas on your phone as they come up, and then you go back to them.
Totally.
Trying to find a story to match the lesson can be done, but it's a lot harder.
Well, you bring up a really good word, basic, and people forget the basics. People are wanting to learn Let It Go on the piano before they learn Jaws, or they're wanting to do all these fancy things before the basics. And really, I don't do anything fancy. I do really basic things. I don't use big vocabulary. I'm not an intellectual person like that. I share simple stories that have impactful meaning that are translated into tangible strategies that people can use. Period. And there's no, like, people are like, what's a trick? First, I'm like, I'm not a magician, okay, so I don't do tricks. Second off, like,
that was my last guess.
I was a magician, which is good, right?
Well, Brian Miller is. He doesn't do that to his skills, but he's a magician.
Yeah. So for me, like, if anybody's listening to it, there's not a trick. It's not complicated. It's simple. And what happens is, because it's so simple and basic, people overlook it, searching for something else versus actually doing the work. Actually taking time to look at the stories, to put them in your phone, to pick one story a month, to develop it. Within a year, you've got 12 stories. Then if you're really wanting to speak and go out and make an impact in the world, now you've got it.
And one approach I've found that, at least for me, has worked very well is social media. So if you're one of us less idealized individuals that are still on social media. I know you're no longer in social media, but it works very well for that. Whereas you come up with an idea for a story, you develop it a bit, and I put it out, like usually 2-minute stories or 3-minute stories at most, and then you get some very direct feedback. Did people were they interested in it? Did they engage with it? They have comments about it. I mean, they're not necessarily going to tell you, I think that story would have worked better this way or that way, right. But at least you get a feeling for, did it resonate or not? And then for me, I find that if I'm ever lacking ideas, immediately I can just go back to everything I've posted in the last year, and there will easily be like 40 stories in there.
Easily. And like you said, like looking through your photos, if you have children, you have endless amounts of stories. Okay, I have endless stories. I'm constantly having stories with it, because people think it also needs to be like this grandiose, I hiked Mount Everest, and no, people want to relate to the people that they're listening to. And so it's really those basic, simple stories that add value, that remind people of something that they should know, feel, or do. It's that.
Yeah, talking about children's stories, my daughter told me the other morning, she said, "Daddy, you are funnier than a snake." And, we had just gone to an animal farm, and they had some exotic animals, and apparently this is what she told me later. She said that the snake going up the handler's arm was hilarious, but I am funnier than a snake. Now I have no idea how I'm ever going to use that story.
You can use this.
I want to find a way to use that story. Okay, so one of the things I've seen you describe when you talked about the different ways you tackle, I can't remember if this one was connection or clarity or confidence, but you talked about relive versus retell when it comes to story. Right. So how do you make, what is the difference? What is reliving and not retelling a story?
Yeah, so when you retell a story, it's your story, and nobody cares about your story. Maybe your mom does, but other than that, nobody cares about it. So retelling it means you're in the past tense. It's something that happened. When you relive it, it means it's in present tense, and it's something that is happening, which means it's happening for you as well. So now it's an engagement strategy that allows you to be engaged with the story, because it's no longer my story, it's our story. So you don't want to use the word was, and you don't want to use past tense. I bring all my stories into present tense.
I actually I've seen that take from a whole bunch of storytellers. I've tried that myself, and I never felt that natural with it. But I know plenty of people that every single story they tell is present tense.
Well, don't confuse natural with uncomfortable, right? Because natural, it's not natural for us to do that because we've never been taught how to do that. So naturally, we're going to speak in past tense, because that's how all stories have been told to us. It's most likely been uncomfortable because you're not used to it. It's different. And so that uncomfort level, what it does is it prevents people from actually taking action because it makes them uncomfortable. It's not really about a natural thing.
Okay, it's a fair point. And okay, so telling it on the present tense, is that the only difference between reliving and retelling?
Exactly, yeah. I relive it, I bring it to present tense, I don't use the word was, and I share the story.
Okay, and something else I've seen you talk about when it comes to some of the techniques you teach people are to do, I think you said something like motivation and not attention.
Yeah.
Is what people are trying to.
Yeah.
Would you consider that or any of the other techniques that you teach also have to do with story? I know you teach a whole bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with storytelling, but I'm just looking for the ones that have. So is the motivation part, does stories come into that or not usually?
Well, in order to be a motivational speaker, you should know what the definition of motivation is, right? And this is a belief that I have because people call themselves motivational speakers and they go, I want to motivate people. You're like, to do what? To be motivated. And you're like, for what? And so like you have to know what type of motivating type of speaker you are.
It's a motive. It's a motive for action.
Yeah. And so that's ultimately it, right? Like when we look at the word and we break it down, I like to study Latin in the sense of prefixes and suffixes. Latin word motive stems from the Latin word motive, which means to move. Ation is the suffix in Latin, which means to take action. So by definition, it means moving people to action. It does not mean getting people to pay attention. People don't pay me to speak. People do not pay me to talk. They pay for my strategies. They pay for the value that I come to bring. It took me years to understand that. And so if I can give them things, simple, tangible things that are impactful that they then can act on, that's how I'm motivating. Because now they can go and do something that they can use and take action on versus sitting for an hour and paying attention to me. I don't want to be that speaker. I don't want to ever be the speaker who people go, whoa, wow, and they give me a standing ovation and they go, that was good for an hour. I want to be a speaker who you might clap for me afterwards, but your life has changed. Your life is different. Your life is like, wow, I could really use that strategy. Cool, that's awesome.
Yeah, I've talked to a whole bunch of people that have said similar things. I think the person that comes to mind is Thames and Webster, and she said something like that the best feedback you should get as a speaker is not there and then. The best feedback should be 3 months down the line or 6 months down the line, which is, what have you done differently because of my speech? And what results have you gotten? Because if the answer is nothing, then something is probably not as it should have been. If the answer to the whole organization is, we've not changed the thing. Yeah, we loved it, not changed the thing.
It's like this concept of good speakers get people to listen. Really good speakers get people to take action. The best speakers get people to take others to get action as well. I got to plug in my computer, by the way, so I'm gonna move this. I hope it's okay.
It's giving a very cool special effect.
There we go. Hope that's still okay.
It's fine. Listen, I have moved these lights about 5 times in the time I was here, trying to figure out why the hell it's so dark in here. So yeah, we're flying by the seat of our pants. Okay, cool. And one thing I've seen you talk about, and I thought the numbers were really interesting, and I expect I'll be quoting them from now on, is that you had at least a couple of numbers I've seen you quote in your presentation as the actual, at least one of them was a financial number, the actual cost of bad communication. Yeah. So if I'm not mistaken, it was $26,000 dollars per year per employee from the Holmes report. Yeah. Right? Yeah.
So the Holmes report found that the average employee in America, I can't do the global because the Holmes report presented that, costs an average of $26,000 per employee. You times that, let's say you have 100 employees, that's literally millions of dollars lost out on miscommunication. But here's the thing. We surveyed 1,200 full-time employees to ask them questions around communication. 85% of full-time employees in America said that they would be significantly better at their job if they had better ways to communicate. However, 75% of those people had never had communication training offered at their company. So what's the biggest problem we have in business? Miscommunication. But what trainings do we do? Sales, leadership, marketing, because, everyone already knows how to talk. Everyone already knows how to communicate. But what we're seeing with the data, what we're hearing from the people is they want and they need communication strategies to make them better at what they do.
Yeah, this is the battle that you have and I have, and everyone that deals with soft skills, and for someone who's not watching this on the video, inverted quotations here, is I find baffling how you still need to convince people of this stuff. Right? So one of the things I tell people in my speeches is I say, listen, there is a reason why millions of people binge on Netflix every night. Like, you can sit and watch Game of Thrones or Money Heist or Breaking Bad for 4 or 5 hours on end, no problem. But most people can't make half an hour through a business meeting without doodling or checking their phone or having their mind wander. And it's not because business is boring. Business is not boring. There's all the excitement of life in business. Sometimes with a little more betrayal than we find in other parts of our life. But no one looks at a PowerPoint presentation for fun. You never called a friend and said, listen, this business report that just came out, I can't stop reading it. You have to check this out. And it's not the content, it's how it's communicated.
Definitely. Well, it really comes down to, in my opinion, what the leaders that I've worked with, A, ego, and then B, false feedback. So the leader will go and give a presentation, and the people that he or she pays come up to them and say, hey, great job. Great. Of course they're going to tell you good job. You pay them. Of course, they're not going to say bad job to you. So it's this like false feedback. And so it's this continual feed of the ego of, like, people will call me and they'll say like, oh, I love to speak. I want to be a speaker. And I'm like, nobody cares that you love to speak. It's, are you good at it and do you add value? That's ultimately what people hire me for, or what other speakers get hired for, is because they add value and they know how to do it, right?
Yeah, I agree with those points. I would even throw in an extra one, which is I think that, well, 2 extra ones. One is that people get into business, and I don't know if we're trying to convince ourselves that we're grown-ups, so we talk in a way that no person has ever spoken before. You would never sit with a friend for a drink or a coffee and talk about synergies and alignment of priorities and things of that nature, but we, for some reason, think this is how grown-ups should speak. And the other one is that a lot of our communication is just appealing to the rational brain. It's just information. It's not pulling on the emotional strings. And anyone who has the latest iPhone, or lives in the city and bought a pickup truck, or has had 4 or 5 children, knows that emotions is why we make decisions. It's not a rational calculation of anything.
Right. Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, I think it's the frustration of anyone working in communication, but at the same time, it's good that this problem still exists, because it gives us something to talk about and try to improve, help people improve with. Now, just one final thing I wanted to ask. I know you seem to be in a mood for a bit of a rant, so I'm going to give you a reason for another one. I heard that your least favorite sentence or one of your least favorite sentences is to step outside your comfort zone.
Yeah. So I can't stand this saying, right? Because we've been taught this for so long. It's like, step outside of your comfort zone. First off, why I hate this is because if you step out, that means you can step back in. So it's a pointless strategy. It's not a strategy. It's not at all a strategy, okay? The second thing is, I have never accomplished anything being uncomfortable, okay? So here's the saying. Here's what it should be. Here's what we should really think about. It should not be step outside of your comfort zone. It should be expand your comfort zone. I want to be more comfortable with more things. I want to know and interact with all different types of people and all different types of cultures and all different types of situations. So when that comes again, I am comfortable to act on it, because ultimately what I have found to be true is when people say they have a confidence issue, they really have a comfort issue. If they're not comfortable, you can't be confident. And people buy into this concept of feeling like they need to feel confident. No, they need to feel comfortable. Because when you're comfortable, you're going to present more naturally. You're going to go out and speak from the heart more. You're going to be able to add more value. So it really isn't about confidence. It's about being comfortable with who you are and what you can bring, and letting know that you're not everyone's not going to like you. Like all these things, focusing on how can you expand your comfort zone today? What can you do today to go and talk to someone who's different religion than you, different sexual orientation than you, different skin color than you, different than you. Go and have those conversations and understand where they're coming from, figure out what it is that they're about, and get more comfortable with that.
Okay. I think that's, particularly now, that is very relevant and very important feedback. And I think if we all took the time to do that a little bit more, and as we're doing, we actually paid attention to other people's stories, it will become a lot easier to understand where they're coming from, and perhaps we wouldn't be in the mess that we are in at the moment.
There's one thing I would like to say about that. Listen to understand, not listen to agree. I'm not asking you to agree with someone who has different politics than you. I'm not asking to agree with someone who has a different religion than you. I'm asking you to understand where that person is coming from so you get why they're even thinking that in the first place. If we can't understand that, well, then we can't have conversations. We can't change. They can't change. We can't grow together. You're not trying to agree. You're trying to understand. That's the point of what we're wanting to do.
I agree. I understand your point, and I agree with it. So Ryan, as I said in the beginning, you made me feel guilty in the beginning of my public speaking journey. You've recently made me feel guilty because you've taken that beautiful step of stepping out of social media. Oh. You haven't stepped out because you can't step back in, but you ran screaming from social media, which I think anyone who has it should understand exactly why. It needs no explanation. Yeah. So if people want to look at more of your stuff, I understand that the only place to look for it is the website, ryanavery.com.
Yeah, ryanavery.com. I have all of my videos up there for you. Every Tuesday with Bellevue University, I do Tuesday Takeaways live at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you want weekly motivation for 15 minutes every Tuesday, thanks to Bellevue University, and you can sign up on my website on there. So ryanavery.com is where you get in touch.
Cool. Listen, this has been a pleasure. I've been following you for a while, and I know you do some amazing work that we haven't even come close to touching here with the world records and all of the charity stuff that you do. So once again, thank you for your time today, man, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. Keep being D at what you do.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves, and until next time. All right, if we just hold on there for a second.